Hurricane Florence.
A lot of people are scared, rightfully so.
Its wrath still being felt 1 year later by thousands across North Carolina.
Every house is abandoned. They were beyond repair. They lost everything.
Tonight, Spectrum News examines the storm, what it taught us about adversity.
I'm thankful to have anything, but I did not have nothing.
As we clean up from Dorian,
no water, a lot of flooding,
and prepare for the next one.
More powerful, more irregular rainfall events.
We take a look back at Hurricane Florence and the lessons learned. Good evening and welcome to Hurricane Florence Lessons Learned. I'm Tim Boyum. We are coming to you tonight from downtown Bluff. It's in the southeastern part of North Carolina in Columbus County, just north of the South Carolina line. About 1,000 people called this place home at the last census 10 years ago, but things have changed. Almost half of that gone. The reason, the Lumber River is just on the other side of these buildings, and they have had 2 major hurricanes over the last few years. Just a year ago this week, the water was up to my waist, and it was like that for 10 days. 2 years before that, with Hurricane Matthew, also up to my waist for 2 weeks. The buildings, you can see the lines to this day that it's impacting. Now, this town was saved from Hurricane Dorian, but the rest of North Carolina, parts of North Carolina, not the case. Let's take a look at Emerald Isle live at this hour, and you can see where there was tornadoes during Hurricane Dorian just last week. It devastated parts of that with homes destroyed and them dealing with those issues. We will go down to Emerald Isle, get a report from a reporter who's been covering that. We'll talk with the mayor there. And over the course of the next hour, we're going to talk to our chief meteorologist about why we saw so much rain with these storms, and also with state leaders about what we've learned from those past storms and what we can do to better prepare for the future. But in the meantime, here in Bluff, things haven't changed much since those storms, and the residents, they're still trying to pick up the pieces and figure this out and what they're going to do next. One of those is Michael Green. He's with Mike and Mike's Computers. Good to see you, sir. Thank you so much for being here. You've lived here your whole life, right?
Yes, I have. I've been here my entire life.
And so just take us back. Hurricane Matthew was the first that struck. What are your memories of Hurricane Matthew in this town, in particular for your store?
Well, basically, I just remember the day before leading up to the hurricane. Basically, it was a normal day like it normally was. I was here working. I'd leave, I'd left that evening, not really thinking, it was calling for the hurricane to come. And we're an area that have hurricanes here, but just thinking that it was going to be a regular hurricane that was coming through, but little did I know that it was going to, come to catastrophic. I mean, it just was the damage here that was done. It has been very traumatizing, as far as the community, the businesses, it's just a sad thing to see. So I really didn't expect to see this type of damage, because again, it was a hurricane that I mean, it was damage that I've never seen in my lifetime here.
And then it happened with Hurricane Florence again. What is it like being in here? When you look around and you see, there's still computers laying around. What's it like to see this?
For me, it's always an emotional time, because I have so many memories here of the community coming in, and just the people. I live here, and I know a lot of the community in which will come visit. So when I come here, it's always a sad time for me, because just looking around. I mean, it looks, if you just look around, it looks very, it's just sad, And so for me, every time I come in here, after Matthew, and it took me a while before I even came back to visit, because it was so emotional, for me to come back to see, my family comes here, my friends, the community, customers, and it's just a sad thing to see, For me, it just extremely sad when I come in.
So what are you doing now?
I've repaired computers. I recently opened inside of the Sunoco gas station down the street. I have a small area inside of there where I actually repair computers. Now, I always say that, I want, inside of Bluff, I want to eventually reopen a computer store, a storefront again.
Here?
Yes. in Fair Bluff, you know, and it's very important. That was one of the, you know, it was very important for me to open here because I'm from this community, and I always believe that it's important to give back to the area in which you grew up in. You know, I got a lot of lessons here from schools, from the community. My church is here. I just got, you know, so many lessons here. So why not the lessons that I've got? You know, why not give them back to the community as well?
You want that, but are you hopeful for that? There's a lot of towns struggling even inside of hurricane, small towns. How do you feel about the future of Fair Bluff?
I'm very excited and optimistic that Fair Bluff can come back better than ever before. As time goes on, I am a little doubtful, but I'm hopeful that Fair Bluff will come back better than it was before. It's important that I talked about this before, that I hope Fair Bluff is not the forgotten place, to where that, you know, everything goes back to normal per se, and then it's forgotten. But if you look around the community, look around here downtown, you see a lot of damage. It's still is with the homes here. They're still abandoned. I mean, you see, I was just going around the community today, and I saw all of the homes. They just were basically still like they were when the hurricane came.
It's like time stopped.
Yeah, and it's sad. I mean, it's extremely sad. So I hope that the hope is that Fair Bluff can come back better than it ever was before.
Well, Michael Green, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good luck to you. We hope to come back and see the store doing well again.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Michael is not the only one that's been facing these challenges. We'll show you as we walk down the street here throughout the evening. Many of these stores are empty. As I mentioned, it feels like time has just stopped here. Loretta Beniti has a closer look at what this town has endured.
Shop after shop abandoned.
I never thought Fair Bluff would flood.
The troubles that live inside these walls, devastating.
We can't save the buildings. They cannot be fixed and repaired.
You ever get that little ball in there, snatch it up. All right, you good.
Randy Britt owns the local hardware store. He opened a small room in the back of his shop to try to help folks out. But when you step into the front of the store, the reality of post-Hurricane Florence Fair Bluff becomes apparent.
I figured it's going, we'll get maybe an inch or two in here. And then, you know, it just kept rising and rising and rising. And so when it was about that deep, I came in here and I toted out my computers and I grabbed one saw. And I was in shock.
A similar story a few stores over. The local beauty shop that nearly recovered from Hurricane Matthew when Florence flooded it again.
After Hurricane Matthew, I cried for the whole day, thinking about all that money that I had invested that was going to be a lifetime investment for my daughter. But after Hurricane Florence come through, we can't save the buildings.
This small town of Fair Bluff sits right on the South Carolina border. About a half a century ago, it was a bustling community. This is where tobacco farmers brought their crops to drop them off at the warehouses. But as that industry changed, the town needed to change as well. It decided to highlight the Lumber River to welcome people to the community. But this river is what's caused the devastation.
The river's behind these homes. It kind of runs at an angle.
State Representative Brendan Jones's district includes Columbus County and Fair Bluff.
If you look straight, you see how the town just falls down?
He took us out in what he called his hurricane truck to show us around this struggling community.
There's not one business left open on this main street.
Home after home abandoned.
A lot of this was rental property. Nobody ever anticipated needing flood insurance in Fair Bluff.
And in fact, the town hasn't seen flooding like this since the 1920s. Is this whole neighborhood empty?
Whole neighborhood. I think one couple may have came back, but that's it. Every house is abandoned. They were beyond repair. They lost everything. They had no reason to stay. And there's still actually people in hotels right now in Lumberton. September of 18 and people are still in motels.
Fair Bluff suffered a double whammy. Matthew, then Florence. And this town says the relief money coming in to help is simply too slow.
We're broke, and we're going to every avenue we can to get funding from everybody that we can.
But with some relief funds tied up in a budget battle in Raleigh and federal dollars slow to pay out, there's not a lot of options.
I really worry about the next 12 to 18 months trying to survive and just to be a township.
The town, should the money become available, plans to move to higher ground. A major change for this small community, but necessary to bring folks back to Fair Bluff.
And necessary because, as you see, there's paint peeling, there's boards up and still all the windows. It is a challenge for this town to figure out what to do. And there's small towns all across North Carolina that are facing issues like this. Fair Bluff is not alone. Driving down here from the Raleigh area, there were all sorts of towns that were facing those similar kinds of issues moving forward. So what should we do with towns like this moving forward? Should we supply them all the money that they need to rebuild, or should we move the downtowns? Joining us now is Mayor Billy Hammond, who is the mayor of this town. Sir, thank you.
Good to see you.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
You are doing fine. How's your town doing?
We're slowly but slowly coming back. It's going to take a long road, and it's been a hard road, but we're going to recover.
So take me back to first Hurricane Matthew. What are your memories of this town we see behind us?
This town at one time was a very booming town back in the Backer time. When Backer left, it dropped down some, but we still had the business in town, and all the business was operating and thriving and moving forward. And then Matthew come in and with about 4 foot of water, 4.5 foot of water, and then it dropped down to about 3 foot of water and stayed here for about 12 to 14 days. And we had a large of our community on the west side of town here in downtown that flooded out, and thank God that our rescue and fire department come in and got everybody out. We did not lose no lives or anything, and so we're on the process of rebounding.
And not to cut you off there, but so that was Hurricane Matthew, and then 2 years later, Hurricane Florence is coming in. What's going through your mind?
I said, not again. And I said, it can't happen. I said, because the river was dry, the swamps were dry, and I said, there's no way that we can have that much water. Well, the next morning after the storm, about 9 o'clock, it come in, started on Main Street, and it just rose steady to about 4.5 foot and dropped back down to about 4 foot and stayed here about 10 days.
So what's going through your mind and your heart at that time? You've grown up here mainly, right?
Right, I've been on the town council 26 years. I've been the mayor for 6 years in November, and so I've lived here since '59.
So watching these storefronts, I mean, what was going through your mind when you saw this happening?
Yeah, I just say that it's going to be hard to recover from it, and it has. It's been a long, hard road. And then Florence comes 23 months later and hits us again, and I just didn't believe it could happen, but it happened, and we have started moving forward with Matthew process and getting houses moved in and tore down.
Which is important for people to get in their home, but you need people to be able to make a living too.
Yes, sir.
So what do we do with downtown here? We now have 2 stores. I've gone through a lot of these buildings here. You can see the water lines, it's studs. I can imagine the environmental damage that's in there. What do we do?
Okay, we're looking at moving east about 1 block and buying some land down there and some buildings and making us what we're calling uptown down there. And we're looking to get some funds to help us do that process through the USDA program.
And you think that'll be far enough to overcome floods like Florence and Matthew?
Hopefully so. I don't say it will be, because I will say that I would have never thought Florence would have flooded us like it did, but it did. And I mean, and it was worse. We got more water from Florence than we did from Matthew.
So what do you do with this area then? I mean, obviously there's all these buildings here. Do you just destroy them?
Yeah, well, we got a couple options on the table what we're discussing now doing with downtown buildings with the property owners.
And so what do you want the people of North Carolina to know, right? I mean, a lot of people are watching this, and some of them high-rise buildings in Charlotte and Raleigh, and you know, the state is urbanizing, right? And a lot of these small towns, even without hurricanes, are struggling. What do you want the folks that are watching this to know?
I want them to know that if they haven't been through this situation, that if they would go through this situation, they would have a different outlook on life and their community.
Do you feel good about the ability to raise the money to move downtown to uptown, like Charlotte has uptown?
Yes, sir. I think we're moving in the positive direction. We've looked at some land and got some options on the table. So.
Well, we certainly wish you the best of luck, sir.
Yes, sir.
Your community, we just talked to Michael Green, who owns a computer store, and he really wants to come back and make this town what it used to be.
He has put his heart and soul into trying to come back and make a business here.
Well, we hope it can happen. Thank you,
yes, sir.
I appreciate you. Thank you for hosting us tonight, sir, too. I appreciate it.
Glad to have you in our town.
Absolutely. We're glad to be here. And one thing that's interesting, just talking to the mayor, the municipal building has already moved down the block. That's because this is the old municipal building. You can still see some of the watermarks. In 2008, this building was dedicated, but you can see the water lines. You can see this is just plywood simply right here. And inside, you can't see it, but it's just studs, and that's what we've seen. In fact, as I looked in some of the buildings before, there's a sign, a press release from Governor McCrory. He hasn't been governor since for some time, obviously. This was a press release from 2016 for a murder in Columbus County. It was still up in there. Another place, a store much like this, BH Small Company Hardware and Clothing. It had cards inside. It was like a general store, and you could tell they had been soaked, and they were sitting. It was like it was stuck in time. It's just terrible to watch. So a lot of people are wondering, how did this happen? How did we get so much rain, and how did this happen in towns like this and others across the state? For more on that, we want to bring in our chief meteorologist, Jeff Crum, Gary Stevenson. Guys, I mean, like Wilmington alone, was it 30+ inches of rain? I mean, it's just, it's mind-boggling to think how that can even happen.
Yeah. It is. Florence was such a big rain producer because of the slow movement and the constant pull of the moisture off the Atlantic in and across the area. And then Matthew, of course, 2 years prior to that.
And we've got to look back even 20 years.
Yeah.
20 years ago this month, Hurricane Floyd came in behind Hurricane Dennis and dropped a copious amount of rain across eastern North Carolina, causing what we referred to then as a 500-year flood.
Right.
And we're thinking, okay, that's it. But now we've had multiple floods since then. Matthew in 2016, which is a storm that rode up the coast, like you said, dropped a lot of rain, but it kept moving.
Right.
That was key. But the weather situation over North Carolina, cold front, we had a cold air damming situation.
Right.
It enhanced the rainfall, and we had multiple inches of rain. We had feet of rain in a 24 to 36 hour period.
Did, yeah, rapid period of time. And then with Florence coming through, the heavy rainfall that we had because of the slow movement, it was blocked in on 3 sides by areas of high pressure, and the storm just really couldn't move anywhere. It was down to 1-2 miles an hour of movement, which is something that we rarely see with the movement of tropical systems. And it rained and it rained, and then the Lumber River flooded again, and it was just, you know, we've been down here all day talking to people, looking around, and you can still hear the pain in the voice of the psychological damage that's been done because of the 2 hits within 2 years here.
And that's just it. When you look at both storms, synoptically completely different.
Right.
One was slow moving, one was faster moving. We still ended up with the same situation. And of course, when we had Dorian, then we had one on the same path. And I'm sure people here, they all, well, we were going to deal with this again. But luckily, the impact was not the same here in the eastern part of North Carolina. It was more of on the coast.
Sure, yeah. At least mercifully, the heavy rainfall stayed further to the east and away. So we didn't have the copious amounts of rain coming into the basin to feed back into the rivers and the streams that would then again perhaps potentially flood downtown once more.
Which basically you always have to remember, when a hurricane is approaching North Carolina, a tropical system is approaching North Carolina, each one has its own personality. I don't want to say personality because they're not a living being, but the effects can be different depending on the track and the synoptic weather system that it's moving into in this area.
Yeah, personality indeed. And Tim is back over. We're going to toss it back over to him. Tim.
All right, guys, thank you so much, and thank you for all your work and hours you put into keeping people safe all across North Carolina. We're about to bring in our panel now to talk about a little further what we've learned and what we can expect potentially in the future. We got Mike Sprayberry here, Emergency Management Director in North Carolina, and Dr. Tom Rickenbach with ECU, Atmospheric Professor, right?
Atmospheric Science.
All right, Atmospheric Science. A very impressive title. I can barely pronounce it. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here for such an important topic. Mike, I want to start with you. What's the biggest thing you think you learned, not only from Florence, but Matthew as well, that we were able to put in place, for instance, with Dorian?
Well, I think there's a lot of different things. One of the biggest things that we learned is that We have a state disaster recovery task force that we activate while we're actually responding. And so that we try to get a head start on the recovery process while we're actually responding. We also have things like generator contracts and fuel contracts that we used to depend on other people for. Now we have those contracts in place for ourselves, and we can get those things down to the folks that need it for public safety. I would also tell you that we have now begun to set up large shelters early so that if there's a big evacuation, we're able to handle it.
Tom, what did you learn most from these last two storms and how it might impact us moving forward?
So I think the big message is we need to get ready for more. We've had in the last several years 3 sort of 100 or 500 year flood storms. Storms that aren't expected to kind of return more than once every 500 years. Really a better way to think about that is a 500-year storm like Florence, it means that there's about a 1/5% chance that that could happen every year. So it's a small chance, but it means that each year we have to be prepared for storms like that. And as the Earth is getting warmer, the atmosphere is holding more water. It's more conducive to producing more extreme precipitation. In addition to that, storms like Florence and Dorian, slow-moving storms, patterns that we're seeing now indicate that storms are moving more slowly because of the pattern of the jet stream, and that's the wind pattern that sort of guides and directs our storms. That's one reason that Hurricane Florence, as it approached the coast, just basically stalled and worked its way slowly down toward Wilmington, producing those wind and rain effects that you don't see very often.
So I want to ask you an amateur science question, because Lord knows I'm an amateur scientist. We did see Fran and Floyd back in the late 90s, huge storms, and then we didn't see any. I mean, we saw Isabel and whatnot, but it was a long time before we had these storms. How do we know it's not some sort of cycle that might end this year, for instance?
Right. Well, there certainly are sort of natural cycles in that modify the occurrence of hurricanes, and that relates to the currents of ocean water across the Atlantic up to the north to Greenland and returning down. And as that, the Gulf Stream is a part of that. And as those currents change in speed and in intensity, it can impact how many hurricanes we get over a decadal kind of time frame. On top of that, we have a signal of warming, of planetary warming. And so you can think about it as those natural cycles occur and continue, but it's ramping up toward an increase in the total number of storms. So though both effects are happening, we have to look at the impacts of both the natural cycles of hurricanes. We've had strong hurricanes since there have been people living here over the last several hundred years. We just simply have more intense ones, and that's a reality that we have to live with.
Okay, gentlemen, stick around. You'll be with us throughout the hour. We'll talk more about what the state is doing also to prepare. But we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to take a trip back to Wilmington to see how they're doing after Florence.
It's a standstill storm. Nobody can do anything but just stand.
I was so scared, I don't hardly know what I did.
Really didn't anticipate that this sort of thing was going to happen.
And this is a live look at Emerald Isle, where they are still recovering at this hour from Hurricane Dorian. We'll have a live report coming up after this break as Hurricane Florence Lessons Learned continues.
Have over $300 million appropriated for long-term housing for Florence. And we're coming up on the anniversary of Florence, and we still don't even have a federal register telling the state how it can spend its money, so we can't even begin spending Florence money.
Good evening and welcome back live here in Fair Bluff for Hurricane Florence Lessons Learned. We're taking a look back at what the state has learned, and as you can see here, how the state is still recovering. Fair Bluff hit hard by Hurricanes Florence and Matthew. Now, Hurricane Dorian recently hit, and we don't want to forget those folks tonight because there are many people that are still suffering at this hour. Let's go out to Emerald Isle now with our Mary Helen Jones, who was there during the coverage, there again tonight. Mary Helen, how are the folks doing out there?
For most of Emerald Isle, this is a normal Thursday night, but where we are standing just 1 week ago, a waterspout turned tornado tore through this area. The waterspout started in the ocean right over here, jumped those buildings, and tore through the park where you can see those lights crashing down walls and then upending RVs like this one, turning them completely on their head. Nothing remaining. In this field right over here just a few days ago, there were lines of RVs that had just been slammed together, windows crashed, and now they're gone because there is a quick cleanup effort going on right now. It's a public-private partnership. There are trucks coming down from Jacksonville, from New Bern to help, and then private contractors also donating their time to help clean up these huge piles of debris that you can see around this area. People in the first days after the storm came over and they were taking what they could, but so much of it you can't salvage. When your TV is gone, you don't need a remote. Looking through this, you can just see all the personal items that people left behind. Couch cushions, there's a bike over here, beach chairs, just utter devastation. Part of this is a rental community, and we found out last week that some of the people living here whose homes were destroyed, they were recovering from Florence, living here while their permanent residents were still being worked on. The good news, though, during this storm, there was a mandatory evacuation here in Emerald Isle. And when we spoke to Governor Cooper here last week, he said that he believes that mandatory evacuation is the reason no one was killed. And just looking at this devastation, even though it was in a small area, no one was hurt. Thank goodness no one was here. I'm Mary Helen Jones reporting live in Emerald Isle.
Mary Helen, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We are back with our panel now. In fact, we've added to it. Dr. Tom Rickenbach, Atmospheric Science Professor at ECU. Of course, Mike Sprayberry, NC Emergency Management Director. Gary Stevenson and Jeff Crum, our Chief Meteorologist. Thank you. Mike, I want to talk to you for a second because one of the lasting images for me was I-40-995. Major interstates that had boats in the middle of them, fish on the roads afterwards, commerce shut down, had to move it to the western part of the state. Jim Trogdon, the Secretary of Transportation, told me they're spending about $225 million on average per year now. It used to be $65 million. How financially can we handle this moving forward if we're going to have as many storms as Dr. Rickenbach tells us we're going to have?
Well, I think that that's a great question. To address I-40-995, DOT has just completed a study, and it's my understanding that what they're going to do is they're going to try to figure out a way to incorporate the repairs needed to mitigate those two highways with some work that they're already scheduled to do by clearing out drainage ditches along the side, maybe raising the road a little bit, and doing other things to make those roads stronger. But I would say that that's a good point, because as we continue to have these severe storms with the frequency that we're having them, we need to really take a hard look at the amount of money that we're spending and where we're building things, to include roads.
Do you think the state's doing what it needs to do as we're facing these increased and more powerful storms?
I mean, I think, the impacts of climate change are local, and it's the states and the local organizations working with the communities and the local and state government that are on the front lines of, coming up with solutions. The frustrating thing is that the big picture solutions are global solutions. So if we're going to mitigate the impacts of stronger storms and maybe make them, more normal in the future, it's going to require a global effort with strong federal energy policy, with strong working with their global partners. And that's something that's way beyond or sort of outside the reality on the ground in communities like where we are now, where decisions have to be made and resources have to be put into rebuilding infrastructure in a smart way and relocating to other regions that are maybe a little safer out of floodplains, if that's something that, it's a difficult issue for communities to grapple with, and the resources it's a very resource-intensive process.
Particularly rural communities, small communities like this, that they're already struggling because commerce is moving into urban areas. Gary, what about these storms themselves following them, right? It seems like technology is better than ever, trying to figure out where the path is going to go, but it's like one little wobble can make the difference between a town like this and a town that does okay.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the problem, because when you look at a tropical system, it's not a spot on the map. It's hundreds of miles wide. And you can get all sorts of impacts. I mean, a hurricane, a tropical system, brings a lot to the party. It's loaded down with tropical moisture, and as Dr. Rickenbach's already talked about, with warmer climate, we have more moisture available into the atmosphere for these to drop even more rainfall. You've got winds, you've got tornadoes, you've got storm surge, and it's like you said, it all depends on the exact track. Again, Dorian, for example, followed a very similar track to Matthew, but the end results in this area completely different, because the atmospheric setup was not exactly the same as what we saw saw with Matthew. So again, it's a fine line on who gets hit sometimes and who doesn't. And one thing I was thinking when Mike Sprayberry was talking about infrastructure, you know, how do you really prepare for a storm that could drop 3 feet of rain in 3 days? Can you actually make a preparation like that?
Pretty tough, you know, when you have that volume of rainfall coming and that compressed period of time. What can you build that can withstand
There's
that?
no asphalt that can withstand
Right.
that. We saw that with Ocracoke just recently where it looked like it was an earthquake.
I was there yesterday and overflew Highway 12 and they were working on it.
Jeff, you and Gary, we were joking. I joked you have like over 100 years experience between the two of you. It's not quite that much. But
I'll
from
own it. Yeah. Right.
But from your viewpoint, talk about what it's been like to cover these storms over your career and where we are today.
Well, it's so different to be in the studio and then get out here in the field and visit the towns and talk with the people that have been so dramatically impacted by the effects of Matthew and Florence coming through here. And I was talking with one fellow today when I pulled up. Just he was in his red pickup truck checking us out, and he stopped me in the parking lot and we started talking. And he just needed an outlet. And he told his story of his frustration of the roof of his house still under a blue tarp from Matthew, survived the floodwaters of Florence, but is frustrated by the lack of understanding to find a proper roadmap that guide the often complex setup that is help from the governments, be it local, our state, or the federal. And there is an overwhelming sense in talking with a number of people here today, they just don't know how to do it. And they just kind of give up about it, and they're frustrated, they're angry about it. They don't feel that we have a government that's working for them, but rather working against them. I had no good answers to give the fella. All I could tell him was stay in touch with the mayor, do what you can to get verbal about it and to try to get some answers. But it would be nice if there were just a clearer path for these folks to be able to navigate the complex structure. And you know, things change every season, everything like that. And they're lost out on it on this end in these small towns.
Mike, I want to go ahead real quick.
Actually, you know what? I was thinking when we were planning this town hall, you know, I grew up in Dunn in Harnett County.
Sure, yeah.
We heard Hazel, Hazel, Hazel. That was the storm. And years went by before we had another Hazel type, and then that was Fran in '96.
Right.
But since '96, think about the number of storms that we have dealt with in North Carolina. We went so many years where Hazel was the storm, and it's still a benchmark storm, Cat 4, strongest one to hit us in modern times. But think of the number of storms that we have seen since '96 impacting North Carolina, and it's pretty incredible.
Mike, I want you to address what Jeff was talking about, because you personally have been under the fire for this. It is complicated, right? Can you talk about where we are sort of in this recovery and the frustration that people have with government trying to get what they need?
First of all, I'd like to say there's been $2.8 billion put out for both disasters already, for both Matthew and Florence. But if you're a homeowner and you haven't gotten what you're supposed to get yet, I mean, you can be frustrated. Just right here in Fair Bluff, there's 71 homeowners that are either being bought out, elevated, or having a demolition rebuild on their homes. So that's a significant, those are significant things that are happening to them. Just to, you know, get a buyout, you've got to find someplace else to go. And you're going to be given the amount of money that your house was worth pre-storm, which could or could not be enough money to find a new place. So we understand the frustration, but I can tell you, our team has doubled down on their efforts to make sure that, you know, we're doing everything that we can. We're working with the federal government to make sure that bureaucracy is simplified so that when people apply for these programs, I mean, to get individual assistance, you first have to apply to Small Business Administration to get a loan and then be denied. That's not intuitive. So we need to work through these kind of things. I can tell you, you know, the CDBG-DR program, Community Development for Block Grants for Disaster Recovery, is a complex program.
That was the one that was controversial, or under fire, I guess.
Right, and so we've now paid out over $20 million. We've got $108 million awarded. So we're working hard to get that money out. We clearly know that the disaster survivors are the priority. We have more money coming in, but let me say that for Florence, we were awarded $336.5 million. We haven't received it yet. So that's still, we haven't even gotten the Federal Register. But I want to tell you, like I said, $2.8 billion already out there. We're working hard. The team is doubling down. While we're doing this, we're also responding to other hurricanes. Dorian, and we anticipate doing a request for a federal declaration any day now. And so we're working hard, and we want the people of Eastern North Carolina that we haven't forgotten them, and you know, we're right here with them, and we're step by step, lockstep with them.
Tom, I know you're a science guy, not an engineer, but I've asked the question a lot too. So on the coast, do we go, instead of 10 or 20, do we go further inland and build higher houses? Do we build up roads higher? Is that the answer of how much rain you think we could get from future storms?
Well, I think there's sort of, when we think about extreme precipitation in our region, there's sort of two areas that are vulnerable. One are the coastal regions, and one are inland regions that are in floodplains or near large river basins that are prone to flood, even for inland precipitation events. So it's almost as if there are a few places from the coast to the floodplains where sort of long-term development or building smart infrastructure, housing assistance for those regions are always going to be a problem that we're going to have. In the coastal areas, the additional complication is that we live in the Barrier Island system, from the Outer Banks to the southern the Crystal Coast region, where those Outer Banks and Outer Banks Islands are very dynamic systems in and of themselves. People love to live on them. Everybody is there in the summertime to enjoy them, as they should. But in the long term, those systems, even independent of the impacts of climate change on extreme precipitation, those are very dynamic systems. They are constantly migrating and shifting. The beach erosion and the sand additions in certain places are things that people have lived with for centuries there. And will continue to. And they will continue to, and there are places where people want to live, and in some ways we're going to have to find a solution that we can all sort of live in balance with it.
Well, speaking of the coast, Wilmington last year, just incredible. Essentially, 40 we're talking about, cut off from the rest of North Carolina. Our Madison Cavalcari was there also for what seemed like weeks, trying to get off what was Wilmington Island. She went back and checked in with some of the folks that were impacted by Florence.
Now let me open it up.
A year later.
Some I kept, but some I just didn't even try because the smell was there.
Sandy Shepard's precious belongings.
This is me, my mom. I think I was in college then.
Still bear the scars from Hurricane Florence.
And they put them in a particular area where we was going to take them apart and set them up. They were destroyed.
Sometimes through loss.
When I saw that, it was like,
you gain a clearer picture of what you endured.
Nobody can get to each other. It's a standstill storm. Nobody can do anything but just stand and depend on each other to help each other. And that's what we did for almost like 7 or 8 days.
Florence destroyed the roof on his home that's been in his family for 6 decades. But despite dealing with the damage, Sandy provided shelter for his neighbors, like 93-year-old Eunice Williams.
I was so scared, I don't hardly know what I did. I did the best I could.
Forced out of her home due to flooding in the small community of Maple Hill.
Still working on stuff like this here.
The recovery has been long.
It's weak, yes. So this could go any time.
There are more repairs to be made and loans to be paid.
And who's prepared to get a loan from FEMA at my age, 65, with probably 25 years to pay for it at 30? At that time, I'll be dead.
There was just a pool of damaged carpeting, wet carpeting. Right
for Steve Schroeder.
Then it started to go all the way out into the hall and down the hall.
The damage was over $100,000.
I was lucky. I had a lot of damage in the house, but everything was covered by insurance.
Insurance covered the costs.
This is the hole over the kitchen.
But the emotional damage...
I really didn't anticipate that this sort of thing was going to happen.
...still lingers.
I'll never forget it, but I hope I never have to go through anything like this again.
We're going to put you and Keith right in the middle, okay?
A crew rescued him and his neighbors from their Leland neighborhood, flooded by Florence's torrential rainfall.
I'm glad to be out of there. I was really feeling isolated and lonely and scared.
He returned home earlier this year once repairs wrapped up.
Just about everything you see here is new.
Others in the Stony Creek subdivision weren't so lucky, but still, they stood together.
There's a lot of talk about how divided we are as a country and a stayed in a city and a neighborhood and everything, but we weren't divided at all during Hurricane Florence.
Most of everything fell in this corner over here.
Sandra Bell is thrilled to be back in her downtown Wilmington home.
I appreciate everything that everyone did for me. It was a blessing.
New furniture, cabinets, and appliances.
And the people that did my house didn't charge me a dime.
She had no insurance and no money to make repairs. Complete strangers like the sheepdogs gutted her house.
Because I had mold and mildew, they had to treat that before they really could do anything.
Then volunteers and neighbors repaired and refurnished the home.
I hope I won't have to go through it no more.
3 North Carolinians with 3 different stories that all share one message.
Let any state or any county know this can happen to you.
There's no question about that. It happened here in Fair Bluff, and it also happened in New Bern. When we come back, Reuben Jones catches up with people he talked to in New Bern last year.
This one here is the worst one I ever seen.
My life is gone. It's a war zone. Bottom line, it was a war zone.
Welcome back, everyone, to our Spectrum News special town hall. Hurricane Florence lessons learned. Live view of Emerald Isle right now, and joining me right now is Jeff Crum, our chief meteorologist in Charlotte. And you know, Jeff, we talked about this earlier in the discussion. Hurricanes, tropical systems bring a lot to the party, and the one thing that Dorian brought was a lot of tornadoes, including an EF2 tornado that hit that mobile home park.
It was one of the larger tornado outbreaks I can recall in recent years associated with a hurricane. And, you know, the base of the system took a while to get in here, but it was those outer bands early in the day that started to feed in, the wind field all in place, and we started to see these warnings issued, I think 5:45 in the morning, all morning long through the afternoon hours. And we even had a couple as we got into the late evening and the early part of the overnight hours. And so there's a lot on the table with these systems, as you said, complex, and you just can't easily get out of the way when something is coming your way with these big systems.
And normally you and I are in the studio telling everybody where it's at. This young man right here, we put him on the front line. Jonathan Lowe, you've covered a couple of storms here, including Dorian. I love it. And Florence. But you know, the reason we put you out there is not for the show. It's to tell people it's dangerous out here. Show them what they're facing. And how is it for you guys in the field?
Well, you know, one thing that I'll say, Gary and Jeff, is that we live these storms right along the people that are in these communities. So for instance, I was in Wilmington for both Florence and for
Dorian. They all run together.
They all run together. I was
Yeah.
about to say Matthew. But I was there for both storms, and during Florence it was substantially better or worse because we lost power early on in the week. So we were without power, ran out of food. And one thing you don't think about is not being able to find a gas station and riding around town, and there only being one gas station open that opened several days into after the storm had already hit. So we lived it right along with, and I think that's important because if it weren't for us and the newspaper and the radio, people would not know, you know, what's going on in communities like Fair Bluff.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for what you do when you're in the field like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's go back out to Emerald Isle and check back in with Mary Helen Jones.
Here, a week out from Dorian, you can still see these debris piles around the Boardwalk RV park here in Emerald Isle. They're still going through cleanup. Right now, I'm joined by the mayor, Eddie Barber. Mayor Barber, last year with Florence, you guys got around 30 inches of rain. How did going through that storm last year prepare you ahead of Dorian?
One thing we did this year, we pre-positioned generators and pumps because last year we had like 30 or 32 inches of rain, and we knew it was important to have the generators and pumps in position, so we pre-positioned those before Dorian this year just in case we had that much rainfall.
And you mentioned some people weren't happy with that mandatory evacuation. How do you feel looking back on it?
I know it was the right decision to make. If you look at the RV park and saw the damage over there, I know the evacuation saved lives, and I'm so happy I issued the mandatory evacuation. And I think it's so important when the mayor issues the mandatory evacuation for people to please evacuate the beach. Our main concern is public safety, and that's why we do the mandatory evacuations for public safety.
And so you guys are going through a cleanup right now. Can you talk to me about the partnership you've gotten from your neighbors here?
It's been a wonderful partnership. The town of New Bern and the town of Jacksonville provided manpower and trucks and equipment. Local contractors have donated their time. Lowe's Home Improvement have just been so generous in giving things. Our local community has really come forward, but it's been so wonderful to see our sister communities reach out and help Emerald Isle. I sent an email out in the afternoon, and within 30 minutes we got a positive response from New Bern and Jacksonville, and the very next day they sent people down here to help us. And it's just been wonderful to see how people have reached out and helped Emerald Isle.
And finally, you know it, we all know it, we're not out of hurricane season yet. So how do you take what you've learned from this and from Florence into the next few months?
Always be prepared, listen to the National Weather Service, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and sign up for our email text that you get from the city, which will tell you when there's a hurricane watch or a hurricane warning. And if you have a mandatory evacuation, please evacuate for public safety.
Mayor Barber, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much.
And this cleanup is still going on, but the message is that Emerald Isle is open for business. They are cleaning up quickly, and hopefully, just like the rest of the area, they can get back to normal life in the coming weeks and months. I'm Mary Helen Jones reporting live in Emerald Isle.
Mary Helen, thank you so much. Hopefully they can get in their homes too. It's important to them. We're back with our panel here, Tom Rickenbach and Mike Sprayberry, and of course our chief meteorologist Gary Stevenson and Jeff Crum. I don't want to sound the alarm here, but we've been talking, sort of beating around the bush here. How dangerous is this situation for the state moving forward, do you think, with these increasing storms?
I think, you know, North Carolina is in a sort of unique position in the country where we have a low-lying coastal plain with large river systems that are prone to flood naturally. We've got very heavily populated coastal regions. We've got a very dynamic barrier island system. And add to that mix an increase in extreme precipitation, not only from hurricanes, but also from, you know, regular weather systems that tend to be rainiest around this time of year as well, on top of the hurricane threat. And it's a region that's just, you know, has always lived with extreme precipitation and will continue to live with that moving forward.
Mike, what keeps you up at night?
You know, just having these severe weather events coming one right after the other. And so right now we're tracking Umberto down in the Caribbean, and you know, we just had Hurricane Dorian scrape by last week and actually make landfall here in North Carolina. So you can actually foresee a time when there would be one hurricane coming right after another. And so do we have the resources to ensure that we can respond adequately to that? So that's kind of what I think about. But even more than that, what about the people that are in the harm's way of these hurricanes? And so that's what keeps me up at night. We've got to figure out a way to help them, get them out of the floodplain, and that's why we're heavily engaged in buyouts right now.
The scariest thing I've heard all day today was when they were talking about Florence, and they said, "Oh no, not again." The other thing I always remember is when I go to these areas, especially after Matthew and went to Wayne County, they said, "Don't forget about us." They were almost afraid for us to leave the area because they thought they were going to be left behind. Gary and Jeff, he mentioned the storm sitting out there. I caught you guys already looking on your phones before we're going, checking the latest forecast. Yeah. I know you haven't checked it in the last few minutes here, but do we have things to be nervous about?
You know, we've got two systems out there. The one off the Florida coast, which potentially, again, emphasis on the word potentially, could impact North Carolina sometime next week. Still far out. We just put a hurricane hunter in it today to investigate. We'll get the model data coming in from the information from that flight. But farther out in the Atlantic, just coming off the coast of Africa, we've got another system. And interestingly enough, generally speaking, we see about 85% of tropical cyclones in the Atlantic basin develop after August 15th. And we are in the climatological peak right now of the Atlantic Basin hurricane season. So if you're going to see a storm in the Atlantic Basin, now is the time it's more than likely going to occur. And the thing that keeps me awake at night is when you get back-to-back systems, the steering currents in the atmosphere are very similar. So you could have back-to-back systems coming in and impacting the same area within a few weeks of each other. And that's what we had 20 years ago this month with Dennis and Floyd. Once Dennis came in, saturated the grounds, filled up the lakes, filled up the streams, filled up the rivers. Here comes Floyd, dumps 12, 18 inches of rain. massive flooding after that. And generally in North Carolina, before we got Matthew, you normally had to have 2 back-to-back tropical systems within about a 2-week period of time in the same area, and you normally had catastrophic flooding. Well, that's what changed when we had Matthew a couple of years ago, but that's kind of what keeps me awake at night, especially this time of the year when we get in the heart of the Atlantic Basin hurricane season.
The thing for me, I think back to 04, 05, a pier mine in Florida. It's warning after warning after warning, and the public just becomes tired of the messaging, tired of the requests to leave home, tired of hearing the doom is coming, the flooding is coming, and they shut down, and then they don't respond, and then it makes it difficult. Yeah, it makes it difficult for our local governments. North Carolina, we have had a unique ability over the years to effectively respond to these disasters. And you know, the key thing is people need to listen and comprehend, but I get it. You hear so much messaging coming your way that you just get worn down about it, and sometimes you just cease to function. That's the thing that keeps me up at night.
And you know, quickly, Tim, what you said is a shift in the path 20 miles east or west can make a huge difference.
A wobble.
Yeah, exactly. Can make a huge difference on impact.
All right, guys, thank you very much. Appreciate your expertise and warnings and lessons for our viewers. New Bern was another area that got hit last year very hard. We talked about Wilmington already. We talked about Emerald Isle in our areas. Our Reuben Jones, who was there in New Bern last year, went back to check on the folks and see how they're doing there.
Well, when we were here a year ago, there was no way we could have joined you from this spot or anywhere near here. Today, the Neuse River is pristine, but the power that this river turned into for Hurricane Florence is still very much on the minds of people here.
I wanna know, have you ever seen rain?
Rain has taken on new meaning for people in New Bern. Musician Howard Matthews didn't recognize his home when the deluge of Florence poured in.
This one here is the worst one I ever seen.
Upstream from Matthews' vantage point,
everything was gone.
Kathy Price watched her house of 32 years lose all semblance of home.
All my memories, my photograph albums.
Her husband sent her photos of what little remained as she watched from out of town.
My husband and I have been married almost 49 years in December. And we've never not had a home. You think, my life is gone.
Life didn't end for anyone in Craven County, but for many, it was life-altering.
There are people who've been displaced from the county who are not back.
John Robinson Jr. is the chair of the Craven County Disaster Recovery Alliance. The Presbyterian pastor says Florence,
there's an appearance of normalcy,
didn't discriminate.
But behind that appearance are thousands of homes that are still damaged.
A quarter of homes in Craven County were impacted by Florence based on FEMA numbers. That's why Robinson and his church are building a volunteer village to house the workers rebuilding this county. A lot of progress has already been made. What did it look like when you first got back?
It was a war zone. Bottom line, it was a war zone.
Just a few miles outside of New Bern is the Fairfield Harbor community. The tranquil neighborhood was hard hit. Gloria Hodgert is a resident.
You'd go out on the golf course and you'd see a 40-foot sailing boat.
Less than a fifth of the homes were insured. The work remains, but Fairfield Harbor says 95% of the houses are rebuilt, this time on higher ground.
You lose almost 48 years worth of stuff.
Kathy Price didn't have insurance when Florence hit. She canceled it 2 months before the storm to save money for renovations. Today,
there's no room in here at all.
She's forced to imagine those upgrades from inside this claustrophobic FEMA trailer.
Couldn't even sling a kitten in there, as they used to say.
It can test a marriage. Price and her husband are preparing to move, but not out of town, rather next door into their new, rebuilt home.
New Bern, North Carolina is my home, and I will be here always until it's my time to go. This is it.
Despite the setbacks, whenever you talk to someone here, they want people to return to New Bern, enjoy the Neuse River, and not be fearful of it. In Craven County, I'm Reuben Jones, Spectrum News.
All right, so as the sun set here in Fair Bluff, they are hoping for a brighter tomorrow. We want to thank the people of Fair Bluff for having us here tonight. Fair Bluff Baptist Church for hosting us. They have been unbelievable. Of course, all of our panelists as well. Gary and Jeff, thank you as well for everything that you do. It is different, and you mentioned it, going out of the studio and seeing this in person. We're looking at bare walls inside.
Yeah, it is. You look inside, you see the damage that's still there, the insidiousness of trying to recover from flooding. And it's difficult, it's a long time, it's frustrating, and a lot of people, as I said earlier, just give up and they move away, and these small towns fold and die off, and that's the sad part.
Which we were built off of, this country,
Right.
small
It
towns.
was.
And, you know, it's amazing. I took a walk on the Blue River Walk they've got here, and it's just the beauty of the river, Lumber River, and to imagine that twice it came into the city and destroyed so much. Yeah. It is heartbreaking to get out and see this.
And our thoughts are with the people of Fair Bluff, Emerald Isle, and all the other towns in the state still recovering. Thank you for watching so much. Good night, everybody.